Welcome to this DW Business Special, asking what the end of zero COVID means for China's economy. Beijing's rigid approach to preventing the spread of coronavirus left Chinese citizens under the strictest conditions on the planet for many months after much of the world had opened up again. Domestic frustration came to a head with rare protests against the government of President Xi Jinping, adding to the pressure caused by a weakening economy. Within a matter of days came an announcement that restrictions were loosening, and now it appears zero COVID has been all but dropped. Well, to discuss the causes and consequences of that, I'm joined in the studio by DW's resident China watcher, Clifford Coonan. Clifford, there's a lot to talk about here, isn't there?
There is. I think we're going to make a bold claim today and say that 2023 is going to be the year that China doubles down on the economy and tries to put COVID in the rearview mirror. But I think it's a roadmap that's going to be very complex.
Well, stay with us and we'll try and navigate that. But also joining us on the line is Marina Rudyak, who is a specialist on China from the University of Heidelberg. Marina, actually, let's go straight in on this. How significant is the shift in policy that we've seen from Beijing just over the last week?
Well, the shift is very significant. Also, the speed at which it happened. I mean, if you think during the 20th Party Congress, I think no one of us would have expected that the government will shift the COVID policy so quick.
And actually, I want to just get an idea of what it's like in China now, particularly in comparison with how it was. So how has life suddenly changed for people in China? Well, Fabian Kretschmer is a journalist in Beijing, and he gave us this update this week.
Now the new rules are implemented nationwide, and they are really very remarkable. When you have mild symptoms and are infected, now you can cure them out in your own home. That's a huge change. Before, just some days ago, we were basically transferred to quarantine centers. Also, the lockdowns have been suspended, the citywide testing. So that is a huge relief for many people, for many residents. Why? Because it brings a lot of predictability into your everyday life, and of course, the fear of getting transferred to a quarantine center is over. Also, the fear of lockdowns is basically over, and also the daily hassle of waiting in front of a PCR test station is over. So I think it's really a big game changer.
Big game changer, Fabian Kretschmer says there. Marina Rudyak, I mean, you said that this is such a big change that seemed almost impossible when we were back at the party conference not that long ago. Why such a sudden change?
Well, there has been a lot of speculations that the party was looking for a way out because of the economic consequences. But despite all the protests that we have witnessed, we should not forget that there is also a very strong pro-zero COVID lobby on the Chinese internet, which is much more outspoken than the protesters. So while the party was looking for a way out, there was a lot of fear of backlash. What happens if the numbers go up? Now they can say, well, it's the citizens that wanted an end of the zero COVID policy, and they can shift the responsibility, in particular to the students who protested against the zero COVID policy, if the numbers go up.
That's interesting, isn't it? The idea of shifting the blame. Clifford Coonan in the studio with me here. This does not come without its risks to the Chinese population, does it, this loosening of the COVID rules?
Yeah, I think it's like Marina was saying. Xi Jinping has said at the party congress that that they were going to take one course. Indeed, he said they were going to annihilate COVID. They haven't done it, and instead, what they've done is that they've, following these protests, they've reviewed the zero COVID policy quite dramatically. I don't think it was the protests that actually drove it myself. I think it's probably more like that this was in train anyway, because the economy has been so flagging of late that China really needs it.
Actually, from what Marina was saying there, she made it almost seem as though the protests provided an opportunity for this change in policy and something for it to be attributed to.
I think so, yeah. I don't think there was a eureka moment. I think definitely this was going on for a while. They were looking around for options. There's a lot of reasons. A lot of things aren't in place. I mean, it's still winter, and getting rid of zero COVID policy in the middle of winter when respiratory diseases are at their worst. You know, we've had lots of reports. One model I was looking at was saying that there could be 1 million deaths, you know, from Wigram advisors had this modeling for that. So there's some pretty shocking figures out there, and we've seen things about people queuing outside pharmacies and things like that. So there's a lot of challenges here.
What I want to get into is whether or not this is a calculated move by Beijing that sort of trades off the benefits of opening up the economy again versus the potential effects for and potential deaths, indeed, you know, the effects for the Chinese population. Now, the announcement of a looser approach to the pandemic came at pretty much exactly the same moment as Beijing released some dire data on China's international trade. Not only did imports fall during November to their lowest level since early 2020, so the start of the pandemic, but have a look at this. Exports plummeted compared with a year earlier. See that? Down 8.7% compared with last November. And that was much more of a drop, more than double, in fact, than what most analysts had been expecting. Marina, Rudyak, on that, I mean, how much is this move by the government about getting China's economy back on track?
Well, certainly economy plays a big role because, as we know, the contract between the party and the people has always been, we make sure that you are continuously better off economically and you stay out of politics. And this contract is not working anymore, in particular not for the young people. And they were the ones who were protesting on the streets and who were linking their protests against the zero COVID policy to a general discontent with the party and its leaders. So the party, I think, finds itself between the rock and the hard place, because on the one hand, opening, as Clifford just said, will mean that the numbers will go up and that the virus will spread in a largely unvaccinated population, especially among the elderly. But on the other hand, there is a need to intervene with the protests and to make sure that those who are protesting against the party and who have linked their zero COVID protests to the protest against the party, that this does not become bigger. So the party needs to react and also needs to find ways to recreate this balance that giving people what they want economically. Because in the end, Chinese people want to be governed properly. And I think this is something that has not received enough attention in the whole debate.
Clifford, Coonan, that idea that I floated, that this was essentially a decision to put at risk the health of some Chinese people in favour of the economy and improving the economy. Is that an exaggeration on my part there?
I think in some ways there's sort of a parallel almost with Britain, with the way Boris Johnson, when they basically at a certain point just said, OK, well, we just have to get rid of this.
Lots of countries did have to make that decision. It feels like a long time ago now, but a lot of them were essentially saying, well, we'll accept more cases for an improvement in our economy.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it isn't the fact that they're not just going to blanket get rid of everything. I think you're going to have localized measures in place. I was, in contact with someone in China today who's just arrived across the border from Hong Kong, and they're in a place, they're being held in quarantine just as they would have been a week ago. So this is very selective, I think, but the narrative is going to be about ending the zero COVID policy. And very important, what we've just had was a meeting of the Politburo, which is one of the main governing bodies within the Communist Party, and they've decided that fixing the economy is going to be the focus of everything. And that's going to be a very important factor, because we also, coming up very soon, we have the Economic Work Conference, which is where the Communist Party decides on policies to run the economy, because China is a centrally planned economy, and that meeting is coming up very soon. And I think seeing what comes out of that is going to be really interesting.
That's like you said at the start of this programme. Next year is going to be all about getting the Chinese economy back on track. Is that right?
I think so. I think it has to be, because we saw the trade figures; they're terrible, and the economy, the social contract that Marina was talking about. If you don't provide economic growth, you don't get to rule anymore.
Marina, Rudyak, is this going to make a difference to the economy, and how quickly is it going to make it? Is it going to make it quickly enough to alleviate the pressure on the Communist Party in Russia, in China, I beg your pardon, to it's easy to confuse those two ideas, no. Is it going to happen quickly enough to alleviate that pressure on Beijing?
Well, I don't think that we can expect a quick recovery because, I mean, it will take time for the economy to rebound. We should be clear that when China will start opening up, the numbers of COVID-infected people will go up. And we will probably see something parallel to what we are seeing now in Germany, with not enough personnel being in place due to high sickness levels. And we can expect the same in China. So the problem will shift from lockdowns to higher COVID infection numbers. On the positive side, it will be easier for international economic activities. We are seeing now that it looks like BioNTech will be recognized as a legit vaccine for foreigners in China reciprocally. Now we saw Germany will be recognizing Sinovac. So at least for companies, it will be easier to send their people to China. But still, I don't think we can expect a quick rebound. And whether it's going to be quick enough will be the big question.
OK, Marina, Clifford, more from you in a second. But the biggest impact of China's strict COVID measures has been felt by the people of China, of course, themselves, who have had 3 years of having their movements restricted and having to abide by stringent testing and quarantining laws. So what do they think of this shift in approach? Well, here's a view of just a couple of people on the streets of Beijing.
If you're in one of the central quarantine facilities, there are serious cases there. You may end up more seriously infected. It would be better if you quarantined at home. I know someone who's been positive for 2 days with his friend, and they're okay taking cold medicine at home. To be honest, I'm quite satisfied with the new policy. Because it's impossible to kill this virus completely. Maybe just live with it and hope it will evolve into the common flu.
To our resident China watcher, Clifford Coonan, on that, they seem pretty pleased there that things are loosening up. Is there any chance of the restrictions returning, though?
Well, I was just thinking about this on Sunday, 22nd of January is Lunar New Year, which is one of the biggest human migrations on the planet. I think the biggest human migration on the planet, when a lot of Chinese people will be going home. And I think a lot of people are already home. They haven't returned to the cities, but you're still going to see a lot of people, huge movement within China. And that's a possible super spreader event on a scale which I think the planet has never seen.
Yeah, it's amazing, right?
Right. And so if that happens, it could be a disaster. But then again, it could be that now that we have ways of treatment and we have, it may not be as grim as it might have been, but there's every possibility that the restrictions could return.
Marina, Rudyak, if I can just cross to you, did those protests show that there has been a change in the relationship between the Chinese people and their government?
Well, I think the question has to be answered with a yes when it comes to the younger population and probably no when it comes to the older population. I think that the people we've been seeing on the streets were mostly young people. It was the young middle class. We've seen students and universities protesting. And this is the generation that has not experienced the hardships their parents have experienced. Their parents have seen China becoming richer, their lives becoming richer and more stable. These young people are seeing prospects of their economic freedom, economic welfare, and their personal development shrinking continuously. So for them, the promise of party taking care of them has been really shattered, and how this will play out, this will be a big question. I've been hearing from my students that they say now we understand why the people in Hong Kong were on the streets, and we feel sorry that we didn't support them back then. So this is a shift that is happening within the younger generation. Whether that will be calls for real democracy, not sure. first of all, people want to be governed in a proper way and the government to abide by the laws. But I think, this can be a spark of some bigger change. We will have to see how this develops.
Well, and on that note, I think that's a good place to leave it. Looking forward to the future and what this might bring. So I'll say thank you to my guests, Marina Rudyak from Heidelberg University. Thank you so much for joining us. And Clifford Coonan as well, our resident China watcher, always here to help us out on these issues. Now, if you've enjoyed this little chat, there is plenty more from DW Business here on the DW News YouTube channel. Do check it out. Until next time, though, take care.